This is Linux Piper. Today is our very first episode, and I wanted to start out with an application that I use pretty much every single day. I use it in my day job quite frequently. It is probably one of the utilities I would say I couldn't live without. It's something that if you do a lot of work in the terminal, whether you're doing it locally or you find yourself remoting via SSH into a server or many different servers, this application is going to make your life a lot easier if you're not already using it. So that application is called tmux. And I want to show you, let's just do a quick little, I like to start out with a little presentation. It's not terribly long and it's not terribly boring. Just to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to talk about. So there was a survey that was done. It's a super not made up survey. It was done, I want to say earlier this year. It was completely done in my head, but I imagine that if I had surveyed 1,000 users or 1,000 different people and divided those people into those who use tmux versus those who don't use tmux, this is what I found. People not using tmux were just very miserable, unhappy people. You really, you can't even be around these people. And then there were the people who used tmux, and they definitely found that their life was far more fulfilling. They felt like they had purpose. They looked forward to getting up every morning. So, tmux is, we're going to talk about, if you've never heard of tmux, we're just going to talk briefly about what it is, and then we're going to actually jump in and see how to use it. I want you to be on the right side of this presentation, the using tmux side, so that you're happy. That's my goal. So what is tmux? tmux is by technical definition, it's a terminal multiplexer. So what is a terminal multiplexer? It's really just a fancy word for running multiple shells inside a single terminal, kind of, sort of. It's the best way I can find to really explain it. And honestly, it's just one of those things that getting into it and using it, you just kind of understand what it's for and how it really makes your life much, much easier. Here's sort of a little screen shot, sort of a mock-up screenshot of what it looks like with my crappy little arrows and different terminals. But if you can imagine, tmux is what you're looking at. Each of these panes, kind of like, it operates with this idea of, or this analogy of using or looking at a window, and a window generally has panes. Each pane is a screen that you're interacting with, or it's kind of its own session in the terminal. So you can see there are 4 panes here inside this window in terminal 1 through 4, and each one are kind of operating independently of the other. What's really cool about this is if you lose your connection, let's say you're running tmux over SSH and your connection gets killed for whatever reason, you just SSH back in and you don't lose your work. Which, I mean, if that's the only thing it did, that would be fantastic. I would still use it every day. But let's actually see what it looks like, because again, I think it's one of those things that if you've never actually seen it, it's probably better to actually jump in and kind of see how it works and see how to navigate. So before I run tmux, obviously, if you're trying to kind of follow along this video on your own, you're going to need to install tmux first. Assuming you're using Linux, you probably wouldn't be watching this video if you weren't. But even if you're using Windows, you could use the tmux will work in the the Windows subsystem for Linux. Or whatever Microsoft's tool is to be able to run Linux. I have done it in the past a long time ago, but it does work. If you're running an Ubuntu-based distribution, you can just apt-get install tmux. I'm running Arch, by the way, so you can just install this from the official Arch repositories, and the package is just called tmux. So I'll put some links in the show notes right down at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be able to pick from a couple different distros that I've listed there, depending on which one you use, and you can go ahead and install that. So I already have it installed, so I'm gonna go ahead and run it. So there's a few different ways that you can run tmux. The most basic way to run it is just to type tmux. But in a couple minutes, I'm gonna show you if tmux was already running and you opened up your terminal, how could you connect to a specific session? And you can kill sessions and start sessions and do some scripting and all sorts of cool stuff. I'm not gonna get into much of that in this video. This was really just more of an introduction, just to kind of get your feet wet with it and kind of see what it's about and why you should be using it. But if you guys enjoy this and you find it useful, I will do another video that's more advanced because really I think a huge amount of the power from tmux is in the ability to do some scripting and to manage multiple sessions and connect to those various sessions whenever you like, or from various machines, or there's just so much flexibility there. So I'm going to go ahead and run it, and I hit enter, and you don't really see much difference here, do you? You see a green line along the bottom of the screen, and you see basically nothing else that looks different. So I'm actually in tmux right now. So tmux is kind of hosting, or it started this session and it's hosting this terminal window that you're looking at. And so what you see here on the bottom is a list of windows. And so by default, this is just Windows 0. And this is my session. So it's created a session, created a window, and it's also created a pane. Now, if you only have one pane open, you really can't tell the difference between the window and the pane. You won't see any difference here. But let's suppose that I do want to create another pane. I'll show you what that looks like, but one thing that's really important with tmux, and I remember when I first started out with using tmux, this was really a little confusing for me in the very beginning, and as I explained it to people I work with and kind of preached the gospel of tmux and why it's so great, I noticed that this was a pretty common stumbling block for those who weren't used to it. But essentially use something called a leader key before you do various commands within tmux. And so all that means is you press a leader key and then you press another key to execute whatever action you're trying to do. So let me show you what that means. I'm actually going to turn on screen keys here so you can see what I'm typing. So the default leader key in tmux is Control and B. So I'm going to press Control B and I'm going to create a new pane. So I hit Control B and then I hit, let me do that again. So I hit Control B and then I hit the %, and that opened a new pane. So now you can see I have a window in a session and there are two panes. So when you type this, so I'm going to close this again and do it one more time. So when you press Control B and then the % on your keyboard, that's the number 5, you're going to have to press Shift 5. So it's Control B, Shift 5. Oops. Control B, Shift 5. Okay. So Control B is the leader key, and the % is the key. The control that I'm going to use to open another pane. Now there is another one, so I'm going to close this again. And this time I'm going to press the leader key, which is again Control B, and then I'm going to press the double quote. So Control B and then Shift double quote. And now we have a new pane that's open. So you notice that this opened it sort of horizontal, one on top of the other, as opposed to side by side. So the % is side by side and double quote is top and bottom. Okay, and within each of these, and again, these are called panes, within each of these panes, you can open up more. So you can open up, as far as I know, as many as you like. So again, each of these panes are operating independently of one another. So I can run various processes within each of these panes, and they won't affect each other, unless you happen to be running a command that intentionally is affecting something else on the machine that you're on. They won't affect each other. So I'm going to close these, and let's just start with these two. Now, what if I want to go to the pane at the top? Well, just like everything else, you start with the leader key, so Control B, B as in boy, and I'm going to press an arrow key. So because I want to go to the pane above, I'm going to press Control B and then the up arrow. And you notice that little green bar here in the center, it changed, so that's just kind of indicating which pane I'm on. So let's say, in this pane, I want to run an htop. Now I'm going to go down to the pane below it, so again, Control B and then the down arrow this time. And let's say in this particular pane, I'm going to run R&R, which is, if you've never used R&R, fantastic little file manager, console-based, really, really great. Sorry about that. I actually opened one of the files. So you can see here, let's go ahead and run this again. Try I screwed it up. So you can see, I can easily within one terminal window, I can be running multiple processes or even have multiple shells open at the same time, which is quite fantastic. So that's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and let's close these. Let's kind of start again. Clean slate here, and let's open another pane. And what I want to do here is, let's suppose that I'm working on some sort of file. Actually, since we're here, we can open up the presentation we were just looking at. So this is the markdown for the presentation we started the video out with. And then up here on the top, let's suppose, well, let's open htop again. Now let's suppose I need a little bit more room. I need to be able to see more of the file here than just a few lines. So how do you resize panes? Because if we're able to resize these panes, that would be great. Htop doesn't really need that much space, but I do need a lot of space for writing and editing the markdown. So the way this works, again, it starts with a leader key, as you might have imagined. However, the difference here is you don't let go of the B key. Don't let go of the leader key while you press an arrow key to indicate which way you want to resize the pane. So let me show you what that looks like. I want this pane here on the bottom, I want it to be taller. So the way I would do that is I would press Control B and just press the up key. Yep. And you can see I totally just screwed it up. So one thing about tmux is that when you're going to resize panes, you really need to do it sort of quick. There can't be a delay between pressing the arrow key, in this case the up arrow key, otherwise it starts getting a little a little cranky. So I'll do that again, just make it smaller, make it taller, real simple. So now that we've done this, so remember in the beginning I was saying it's really great because you can disconnect from your session and reconnect, and maybe is not as useful when you're just working locally like I'm doing here, but let me show you what that looks like. Because if I had connected to a remote server using SSH, and this was my SSH session here that you're looking at, and then I disconnected my SSH session and reconnected, basically the steps are the same, except for I'm not connecting and reconnecting. So let me show you what that looks like. So when you want to leave a tmux session, but you want to leave that session running, it's real simple. You press your leader key, as you probably can imagine, and you press the letter D for disconnect. So I'm going to press Control B and D. So now I have disconnected from my tmux session. Now, just to kind of show you how cool this is, I can close my terminal window, start a new terminal, and I can type. Now if I just type tmux, it's going to create a new session. So I don't want to create a new session. I want to connect to the one that I was just working on so that I can pick up my markdown or go back to editing my markdown. So if I just type tmux, I'll show you what that looks like. There's nothing there. It's as if I started a brand new session. So I'm going to close that. And so the way you would attach to a session, there's two different ways. You can attach by session name, or you can attach the most recent session. And we're going to do the latter. So to connect to the most recent session, you can just pass the A parameter, and that just means attach. And there we go. We're back in our session. Pretty cool, huh? So even closing this terminal, closing this window, reopening it, it still preserved my session and my work. I didn't lose anything. Now, of course, if I'm working locally and I rebooted my machine, I'm going to lose that session, obviously. But at least while I'm currently logged in, even if I went to a virtual console or another TTY console, I would still be able to reconnect to that tmux session. So I don't need to be running a desktop environment. I can just purely from a TTY console, I can still access those tmux sessions, which is super cool and useful. Now, let's suppose that I don't want to create another session, but I would like to create another window. Maybe these windows are getting a little crowded and I don't want another session, I just want another window. Well, that's really easy to do. Remember I said it shows our windows here at the bottom. So the way we do that is we press Control B and C, and that creates a new window. And you can see we have window 0 and window 1. And if I want to go back to the previous, I can press Control B and then P for previous, and that takes me back to the other window. Another way to do it, it's called the interactive way, is I can press Control B and then W for window list, and you see a list here. And this will actually show if you have multiple sessions as well. You'll see the list, you'll see all those sessions here. And you can see on the bottom, so on the top is a little tree view of my windows and, my session, and then the windows within the session. And then on the bottom, you see like a little, almost like a screenshot of what was most recently visible within that window. So I'm going to go back here and let's see, we'll open RNR again. I'll try not to screw it up this time. No promises though. And so now we're able to work with 2 separate windows. We have 3 panes total, and no problem. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect again. Clear this. Let's actually just close it. Again, we'll start fresh. I want to show you the other way to connect to your session. So if maybe you forgot, what sessions you have running. You went to bed, you got up the next morning, and you opened up your terminal, and you're like, man, I don't want to lose all my work, but I don't remember that session that I was using. So if you type tmux and then ls, just like the ls command, if you were to list out directories and files on Linux, it'll give you a list of the sessions that are there. So we only have one session right now. Let's create a new session just for demo purposes, and I'm going to disconnect, and let's do that again. Oops. So now we're going to have 3 sessions. There we go. So I remember that the very first session, which is session 0, is the one I want to connect to. So I want to be able to attach to a specific session. So I can say attach -t and then my session name, which is 0, and that takes me right to my session. So there we go. So now you have a really basic idea of creating a session, creating windows, creating panes, navigating panes. I hope that's useful. There's a couple other little tricks I want to show you. These are things that I didn't learn right off the bat, but let me show you a couple little things here. Let's go back to our list of windows, and let's go to our 2-pane setup here. And I'm going to open up another. So let's suppose I'd like another pane, and I'd really like to be able to see the time for whatever. Maybe I'm not using a desktop environment and I don't have a clock readily available, or I just want to look super cool, who knows. tmux actually has a little built-in time function here. So if you press Control B and then T, like time, it will fill up this pane with the current time, which is kind of cool. Another thing we can do, which I find myself using quite often. So let's suppose in this scenario, again, I want to be able to edit this markdown file, and I'm just focused on the markdown file. I don't really care what HTOP's doing right now or whatever it happens to be at the given time. I just want to zoom in on this particular pane temporarily without resizing, going through the whole resizing bit. I just want to zoom in. So you can press Control B and then Z. And tmux has filled up the whole window with this single pane. And so that way you can just focus on that one pane temporarily instead of, having to having to resize a bunch of stuff. And if you want to go back to the way it was, just press Control B and Z again, and you're all set. The last thing I want to show you real quick is you notice when we created these sessions, let's disconnect again. When we created these sessions, they just got names like 0, 2, and 3. So not very useful. It's just tmux defaulting to an index value based on the number of sessions that are currently there. But if you really find yourself working, and I don't tend to work with several different sessions simultaneously all on one machine, but if you do for whatever reason, and that's totally fine, that's why the feature is there, you might want to rename them. And so let's go back to our first session here. So we're going to do tmux a for attach, t, and t is is the argument for target. So, and then we're going to give it a name. So we're back to session 0, but let's rename this to, I don't know, something like markdown or editing or something like that. So the way you rename a session is Control B and then the $. And you can see the bottom part of the screen turned kind of yellow or gold, and it's prompting me to rename the session. So instead of it being 0, let's just call it work. And so now if we disconnect, do tmux ls, we can see that 0, which was up there at the top, and it's sorting it by index, of course, sorting it numerically and then alphabetically. Work is now at the bottom. It was 0. So now if I want to, first of all, now it's clear what that session actually is. And now when I want to attach to it, I can just target work. And also when I go back to, remember that interactive function that I showed you, you can see here it says work up at the top in the tree view. So it's just a nice little feature so that you don't have to, try and memorize, 0 was for my music, and 1 was for email, and 2 was blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Just makes it a bit easier. So those are the basics. You now know enough to be able to use tmux. I hope this was helpful. If you have any comments or suggestions, or if you really like this, if this was useful and you want to see a more advanced video, just put some comments down below and let me know what you'd like to see, and I'd be happy to do it.